Our final guest tonight is a Salon favourite. In fact, she's been at Salon twice before. The first time at Shoreditch House, and I remember the night that you were there, a car went on fire outside. Do you remember that? And you had to leave early. That was Shoreditch then. Not Shoreditch now. Anyway, so she returns tonight. She's going to be reading from her brand new novel. She won a Betty Trask for her debut. She won a Costa Prize for The Hand That First Held Mine. Her new novel, which is fantastic, is going to win everything. This must be the place. It has already won me. It tells the story, and I realised as I was writing this, I thought it sounds so unlikely, but bear with me. It tells the story of Daniel, a bedraggled but handsome linguist from Brooklyn, and his sometime wife Claudette, a very beautiful movie star who has faked her own death in the Baltic, I think, and is now living in a quiet corner of Ireland. So it's those two. It's their children, it's their parents' lovers, it's people their parents would have liked to be their lovers. It's all of them. It's happening all over the world. It's mostly happening in here. Please welcome Maggie O'Farrell.
Hi.
Hi. Is that microphone all right for you?
I think Joan and I must be the same height. It's perfect. Thank you.
It really is a very different book for you. We're going to talk more about that in a wee minute. But I in terms of form, all these different voices, each of the characters that I talked about has their own chapter or chapters. I think there is one person we only hear from once, towards the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, do you want to read a wee bit?
Sure, why not? I'm going to read a bit, and I've made a little note to myself that I've got to tell you 3 things. That actually, you've told me a few things already. It's about Daniel, who's an American professor, and he's just recently gone through a divorce, and he's in Ireland to pick up the ashes of his grandfather, which have been kind of left there for quite some time. And I'm going to read a section, and just before this section, he has stopped to help somebody who's got a flat tyre at the side of the road, and he hasn't quite clocked. He's a little bit oblivious, Daniel, among other things. He hasn't clocked that the woman he's stopped to help is actually a very famous actress who has become a recluse, but he hasn't realised it's her. So this is him later at his B&B in Ireland, and he's not having a great time on this holiday. There was a knock at the door, and my landlady, a Mrs. Spillane, a woman with hair that stood out around her head like dandelion down, and an apron surgically attached to her front, stood there. I had hastily stubbed out the joint and done that pathetic smoker's wave in front of me. Why do we do that? But her expression was that of a woman who knew she was being robbed, but couldn't yet prove it. "Mr. Sullivan," she said. "Yes," I said. I even pulled myself straighter, as if to withstand and refute accusations of getting high, alone in the middle of nowhere, thousands of miles from home. "This came for you." She was holding, I now noticed, a small parcel wrapped in a calico bag. "Thanks." I put up my hands to take it, but she pulled it away. She glanced up and down the corridor, as if checking for the presence of the FBI. "She wants to see you," she whispered. "Who does?" I replied, noticing that I too was whispering. It appeared to be catching. Mrs. Spillane examined me at our new proximity. I wondered for a fleeting moment what she saw. A large American man, starting to grey at the temples, the whites of his eyes scribbled with red calligraphy. Could she read in its runes my jet lag, my long-term insomnia, my dope habit, and my unassailable paternal grief? Hard to tell. "She does," my landlady said, leaning forward, attempting what seemed to be a wink. "I'm sorry," I began, "but I have no idea." She thrust the package into my hands. For a second, I had a mad notion that my ex-wife had somehow caught up with me and sent me some noxious parcel. Excrement, the semen of her lover, the severed head of the dog. Then I looked down at the familiar blue tape bisecting some cardboard. It was my grandfather's ashes. "Oh," I said, "how did... You left it beside her car when you were helping her." I clutched Grandpa to me. I remembered placing him to one side in order to winch down the jack for the woman, but how could I have forgotten to pick him up? "Sorry, Grandpa," I muttered. "God rest his soul," Mrs. Spillane said, crossing herself. "Yes," I said, "thank you." Well, I reached for the door. "I think I'll turn in," and Mrs. Spillane put her hand on the door to stop it closing. She wants to talk to you, she was whispering again. Who does? She sighed, exasperated. She does. You mean the woman with... I had in my dope-addled state to concentrate really hard so as not to say the great rack. The hair? Mrs. Spillane put her face close to mine. She was frowning, examining me, as if she had been considering buying me, but was coming to the conclusion that I had too many defects. Do you know how to find her? She whispered, with another glance over her shoulder. What? Mrs. Spillane hesitated. You don't know? Should I? I said, wondering how long she and I could go on conversing in questions. She didn't tell you? I was floored for a moment, but came back with, why would she? Mrs. Spillane said, thereby breaking the spell. She turned abruptly and said, I need to make a telephone call. I was left there with Grandpa standing in the doorway. I shut my door and leaned my head into its glossy wood. Something about seeing the water flow grain of it at such close proximity made the decision ride in me like sap. I had had enough. This cryptic nonsense was my breaking point. I would go home and try to repair what was left of my life. I pushed myself upright. I crossed the room, flipped open my suitcase and started tossing things into it. I was dithering about how Grandpa should travel, carry on or hold, when there was another knock at the door. Mrs. Spillane stood in the corridor as before, the apron, the hair, the crossed hands. She'll be expecting you tomorrow, she said in a hushed, sepulchral tone. The crossroads at 10. What? I told her breakfast would be finished by 8:30, so you could come earlier, but Claudette said 8:10 suited her best. Hang on a second. I'm to give you directions to the crossroad. I'll have a map for you at breakfast. She disappeared stage right, and I was left staring at an open door. Typical, I thought, slamming it. A woman like that would have to have a pretentious name. She could be called something like Jane or Sarah, I ranted to Grandpa as I hurled books into my case. No, nothing like Laura or Claire. It would have to be something foreign and fancy like Claude. Halfway through uttering her name for the first time, something gave way. It was as if the bricks and timber of an edifice were falling all around me. I suddenly remembered where I'd seen her before. She had been a dancer, or was it a doctor? I'd seen her as an amputee, a murderess, a detective, a nanny. I'd watched her be French, Spanish, Italian, Persian. She'd escaped death and she'd died of cancer, car accidents, pneumonia, tiger attack. She'd killed and been killed. I'd seen her be 15, I'd seen her be 60. She'd fought, punched, stolen, lied, cheated, saved lives, given birth, given head, shot, swum, danced, dressed, undressed, over and over for all of us. To apply the word famous to her wouldn't be entirely accurate. Fame is what she'd had before she'd done what she did. What came afterwards went beyond into a kind of gilded, deified sphere of notoriety. These days, she was known less for her films than for having vanished right at the height of her career. Poof, ta-da, just like that. Thereby making herself into one of the most speculated about enigmas of our time. I don't know if she'd thought ducking out like that would lessen her fame, but it only had the opposite effect. The press tend not to take such temerity lightly. Whatever had happened, she had pulled off the thing that people of her ilk must dream about all the time. She'd left her life. She'd pulled the plug. She'd disappeared. And I had found her. I could read a bit of... I could read a bit of Claudette, or should we say Claudette? Just a little bit. This is going back in time. We're in a very non-chronological kind of book here. So this is Claudette several years before she meets Daniel, and she is beginning to unravel. This is her at the height of her fame. She's on set here. She steps out of the door, and it is as if she has entered an oven. The heat swarms in at her face, her neck. It finds its way, immediate, insistent, under her clothes. India, she tells herself. She's in India. She had forgotten this. Hard to remember when you are escorted, like a child, like a criminal, from hotel to set and back again, when each of your meals is delivered to you on a tray before you even realise you are hungry, when the person at the end of the room service telephone speaks impeccable English and already knows your likes and dislikes, your requirements, your date of birth, your taste in decor, sleepwear, thread count, toiletries, beverages, reading matter, material, music. Waiting for her at the trailer door is a person with a clipboard and a headset. He doesn't greet her, but speaks about her into his microphone. Ms. Wells is leaving makeup, he narrates, stepping in beside her. We're heading towards the set right now, ETA 2 minutes. Oh, she stopped to pick something. No, we're on our way again. Yes, hair and makeup finished, yes. She walks through groups of people. They part as she approaches, like iron filings repelled by a magnet. They look at her, then away, too quickly, as if she might be enraged by their gaze, as if looking upon her might turn them to stone. She puts up a hand and touches her hair, stiff with lacquer, texture like candy floss. It can't be her hair, no, not at all. Without warning, someone appears, stepping into her path, and lassoes her about the neck with something, a spotted scarf. Claudette stops, examines this person at close quarters. It is a woman in her 20s. She has black lines drawn in a beautiful arc on her eyelid. The brooch of a bird in flight pinned to her collar. She is tugging the scarf to the side, tying it, frowning, retying it. I like your bird, Claudette says. The girl starts as if a statue has spoken. Her hand flies to the brooch. Oh, she says, flushing deep crimson. Well, thanks. It is the green of oxidized copper. The girl glances up at her and her expression is one of fear. Why, Claudette wants to say, why are you afraid of me? Stop for wardrobe, the man with the clipboard mutters into his mouthpiece. Shouldn't take too long. The girl plucks at the scarf with trembling fingers, eyes lowered. Oxidized copper, exactly, Claudette thinks. Or absinthe, or arsenic. Wasn't arsenic once used as wall paint? She imagines Victorian children running their fingertips along it, their clothes brushing up against it, lethal atoms adhering to the cloth, making their way to the skin, to the blood, where they spore and spin through the veins like, that's it, the girl whispers and steps away, out of Claudette's path. Claudette isn't sure what else to do, so she walks forward. Okay, the man with the clipboard says. On the move again, just about to pass catering. Yeah, Miss Wells is all good for wardrobe. Claudette stops. We've stopped, the man says. She turns her head one way. Catering vans, the staff staring at her. She turns it the other way. A large lorry containing scaffolding, rigging. I don't know, she's just looking around. She suddenly recognises the source of her trouble. She can pinpoint what she needs, why she has this bolus of unease in her abdomen. Of course. She turns on her heel. She walks back the other way. We're on the move again, but we're going the wrong way. I don't know. The man has to break into a trot to keep up with her. I've no idea. Miss Wells, we need to go this way. They're waiting for you. Miss Wells. It's easy to step things up. Claudette spends 30 minutes a day on a running machine. Her limbs glide into a sprint. Her back-combed hair bounces back and forth on the top of her skull. The scarf unravels and streams behind her. Thank you very much.
Ooh, she is a one, that Claudette.
You sound like my mum.
Sorry?
You sound like my mum. That's what
I
my
sound
mum
like
used to
she's
say
a
about me.
one.
Yeah.
No, she certainly is. As is he, to be fair. I mean, they are fairly well matched in some ways, I think. But you said just then when you were reading, says he pointing, that it's a non-chronologic-y kind of book, and I was thinking it is. And I was casting an eye over it, and I had to kind of keep going backwards and forwards between bits to make sure. And each time I did that, to be fair, I learned more. So why did you make the choice to structure it in that way? Because it is a choice. Well,
I think it goes back to the epigraph, which I'll read really quickly, which is Louis MacNeice. It's from one of my favourite poems. And it's, world is crazier and more of it than we think, incorrigibly plural. And I wanted to write a book which was... reflected life in a way, the closest I could get to it. And I think life isn't neat and chronological and goes nicely from A to B. It's very messy and it's diverse, and you can't really tell a story from one person's point of view. You know, it's a story of a marriage, really, and a marriage is a very, very complicated thing, and there are lots of different people's opinion, and, you know, our choices in life go back maybe a generation or two generations. You know, our sort of the genealogy of who we want to be and where we want to be are rooted in maybe decisions people who lived 100 years ago probably made themselves. So I suppose I wanted something to reflect the complexity that I felt.
There are recurring themes to do with love at first sight, for example. That's something that happens several times in the book. People finding redemption through love. And they're so very clear, and it's, I think, so very clear what you think about some of them. But I wonder if you went in with those themes, or if they just kind of emerged. Did the characters learn about their inheritance by virtue of you writing them, or did you already know what they were like?
I knew nothing when I started. No, I always do. I'm not really much of a planner in fiction or in life, I have to say, actually. No, I think I just was overcome by this urge to write a book that was big and would cover lots of different time zones and lots of geography. I just had I suppose it's...
Do you know all the places in the book?
Yeah, I have been. I couldn't ever write about a place I hadn't been. I think I would feel inherently wrong. You have to be somewhere, especially because it's a book very much rooted in geography and place. You have to have experienced that place to write about it. So no, I have. But I suppose it was a reaction in a way to its predecessor. The book I wrote before had a very, very tight structure and a very, very tight time frame. It happens over 4 days, and it's from a viewpoint of 4 different characters. And in a way, it was a bit like, finishing that book was a bit like, I imagine what it was like taking off a corset and just thinking, right, okay, now I can do whatever I want.
So you put restrictions on yourself, which you enjoyed, and then you enjoyed taking them off. Exactly.
Yeah. And it actually started, it was kind of a joke, actually, the way it started. I have a friend who, I don't ever listen to or read any reviews or any, but one of my friends...
Of your own work?
Yeah, my own work.
How do you stop that? Because it's very hard. Surely people must say, lovely review in The Guardian, or, isn't The Telegraph a bit mean?
Yeah, they do. But it's what I would just rather not know. I think the last thing you need as a writer is to hear yourself explain to yourself. I think you just have to bury your head in the sand. I take a bit of an ostrich approach to it. You have to just write for yourself, really. You have to write the book you want to write. And I think even if it's a nice review, I think you don't need to hear what people think of you. You don't need to hear what people explaining your book to other readers. I don't think it's very good for you. I don't think it's good for your writing. I do. My husband very nicely reads all the reviews, and he'll tell me if it was good, middling, or bad. And if it's bad, he tells me who wrote it. Because you never know when you're in your party. You think, okay, there you are. I know.
Do you do the same for him? Do you do the same
he
for
reads
Will?
it. No, he'll.
He just does it.
He just does it. He mans up and does it.
So how did it start?
Well, it started because a friend of mine, apparently she heard something on the radio. Someone was talking about, I can't remember even which one of my books it was, and the man said, well, there are no men in this book and no guns. And it became a kind of joke. Between us. So I said to her, okay, I'm going to write one. I'm going to write a chapter about a man and a gun. And that's actually how the first chapter started. And I sent it to her, and she said, I love it, you've got to carry on. So that's right. It was sort of a joke, actually, but then it kind of found its own feet. So
there's Daniel and there's Claudette. There's Daniel's children from his first marriage. And I'm quite besotted with the son, Niall. And you never say it, but I think he's autistic.
Yeah, I think it's there if you want to say it. I wouldn't say autistic. I think he's probably on the spectrum. He's probably nearer Asperger's. I think he's very high-functioning Asperger's.
So he's lots of lists at the beginning.
Yeah, it's never made explicit, but certainly I think probably, it's interesting that you say that. I didn't want to put a label on him, but yeah, I think it's definitely there.
The label he does have is his terrible skin problem.
Yeah, that's right.
Really, really, really bad eczema. He rubs himself until he bleeds, and there's this kind of exquisite pleasure and pain in it, which you communicate so clearly, but also you communicate the suffering of his father who wants to make it stop for his son. That felt very personal.
It is very personal, yeah. One of my children suffers, and I use the word advisedly, from chronic eczema. And you see, I'm going to have a Susan Calman moment now. I brought a tissue ready. But I did, and so I've been living through the past, however many, 7 years now, trying to help a child who lives with a condition that's beyond tortuous, and the NHS doesn't really have a lot in its cabinet to help you. They kind of say there's a bit of paraffin, you can have a bit of steroids, but there's nothing really. They say always there's no cure for eczema. It's just about trying to help. We're not talking about a few itches. This is a kind of all over body. It's a disease. So I have been living through it, and it seemed to me that this book was sort of about people who are unhappy in their skin, everybody in the book, at some point in their lives, just like Claudette on her film set, she isn't happy with where she is and who she is. She wants to escape. And I suppose Niall and his condition is a kind of literal representation of that idea.
And the list of things that set him off was, I mean, it was kind of almost like a parody. It seems there isn't anything that he would be free from.
No, it's true. I mean, yeah, if you're living at that level, my daughter also she's allergic to many, many things, some of which are life-threatening. And so it is, the world becomes
actually life-threatening? What?
Yeah, my daughter, she lives with life-threatening allergies. So the world does become, the whole world becomes totally different. You do see everything as a kind of risk. You know, I think having lived with, bringing up a child like that, I would look at this table and think, you see that coaster, that would probably make her itchy if she touched that. And how do I know there have been no peanuts on this table? And you sort of, it's almost as if you're becoming a sort of OCD sufferer, but it's not. It's actually about making sure your child is not only firstly alive, but also as comfortable as she can be.
And this happens, as you say, in the book on a physical level, on an emotional level, on a metaphorical level. There are situations that characters can't put themselves in because that will be perilous to them emotionally. They'll be destabilised. Exactly. Or with Daniel and alcohol later on. But I wonder, was there a character that was your favourite when you were writing it, that you wanted to spend more time with?
Oh, I don't know. I liked them all, actually. I found it a very... I was very happy writing this book. I really enjoyed it. There are some books that are very difficult to write for a variety of reasons, but this one I found immensely satisfying in a lot of ways. It was a bit like a puzzle. In fact, I did have, because it's got a very, very complicated chronology and geography, I bought myself the biggest pinboard that money could buy. I mean, it was enormous, like an ocean liner of pinboards. And I put it up on the wall above my desk, and I had so many different colours of post-it notes, and every character had its colour, and the chronological layout of the book was there, and the paginated layout of the book was there. And then my youngest daughter, who was she's probably almost 2 at the time, she came into the bathroom one morning, and I was cleaning my teeth, and it was only after a while when I heard her say, "All gone." All gone. And I realised that she was holding something in her hand. And I said, "What's that you've got there, darling?" And I opened up her tiny fingers, and she had this enormous ball of coloured paper that had been crushed and I think probably sucked. And I just thought, oh my God. And I went and had a look, and she'd done the whole thing. She'd climbed on the desk, pulled it all off one by one, in this kind of delicious destruction.
Are you the person who went to see Ella in the break about writer's block? Somebody went to see Ella for a cure about that. So was that a bit freeing, though, as well, to have it all destroyed, or was there nothing
initially,
good about it at all? No, there wasn't anything, was there? It was just really quite shit. Yeah.
It was really quite galling. There's nothing you could do. She was so pleased. She was so pleased with the book. And I just, after a while, I took it, and then I just thought, actually, you know what, you can have it. There's no point. There's nothing I could salvage here. But in a way, I think actually it made the book stronger. I think it's what that thing, it goes back to Yeats, he says nothing can be stole or whole until it has been rent. And I kept saying this to myself, thinking, well, Yeats surely knew what he was talking about. I can put this book back together. So it did, it was a challenge in many ways. Parenting, as many other things, as also as a writer, keeping calm. But it didn't force me to look at the book again and sort of restructure it from scratch.
There's one chapter that I particularly love, which is the auction catalogue. Tell us about that. It's an auction. It's a catalogue of Claudette's effects. And by the way, we never find out. It's her assistant who I don't quite like. So has he stolen those things?
Yeah, he steals them. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So talk us through how you devised that.
Well, I've always it was right there. Thank you. Well, that's a big compliment. It was always an idea I had right from the start, and I wasn't sure whether A, I could really pull it off, and B, whether I'd be allowed to do it, whether my publishers would just say, "You what? You want to what?" But it occurred to me that Claudette vanishes from her life. She literally just walks out one day. She takes a son and she takes a really small rucksack, and just the idea of how much would be left behind, and the sort of story that you can tell by our possessions. The narrative inherent in our objects, the objects that we keep and we live around us. And also, I have a friend who's an auctioneer, and and he auctions off all kinds of things. And I was saying to him, I was having a conversation with him one day over dinner, and I was saying that I didn't understand, I couldn't comprehend those people that, bought Elvis's pants or whatever, John Lennon's glasses. I said, I didn't really get it. I said, why don't they just listen to his music? But why would you want to own something? And he said, okay, I've got something to show you. Come and see this. And he took me into his office, and he handed me a letter from Charlotte Bronte. And he said, you can hold it if you want. And so I held this note, and it was a note from Charlotte Bronte. It was a kind of almost like an answer to a fan letter. I think somebody had written to her, and she was writing back saying, I'm so glad you enjoyed Jane Eyre, da, 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 da. And I actually ran my finger over the ink of her signature, and he said, you see, you get it now, don't you? And I said, oh, and if I'd had £25,000 in my pocket, I would have handed it to him and said, yes, I want it. So it was partly that moment where I understood that frisson and that sort of collapsing of space and time between you and somebody you revere.
And some of the things in there are letters, and some of them are mixtapes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And whose is the handwriting in the letters?
I couldn't tell you, Damien.
Oh, you
because then I'd have to kill you.
Come on, maybe is it somebody we know?
Is it somebody I know? Yeah, people I know. But I actually had to go into. I had to find lots of, because it all happens in the early 90s. The bit that these objects come from, and I had to find fax paper. Where do you find fax paper these days? It's impossible. So it was odd. I had to go into the kind of boxes, and I had to go and ring friends and say, do you have any faxes? Does anyone have any tapes? Does anyone have any...
Yeah. It's kind of weird. It's like a period. It's like a historical period.
Well, it was funny. The actual physical photographs are the last thing I did, because I finished the book, and I wasn't sure whether I was actually going to go the whole hog with the catalogue and actually recreate the photographs as well. And then as I finished the book, I thought, yeah, of course I have to. I have to do the photographs. I have to do the real thing. So that was a really odd moment. It was sort of like this sort of a kind of metafiction. I actually had to materialise the objects for this woman that had so far only actually lived inside my head.
And you found them. You found the scarf and everything else.
Yeah, I had to find everything. Find dresses and scarves and letters and books and glasses and a hospital ID band, and everything had to be recreated.
That's such a good way of not writing, going and finding it.
I had finished.
And you are talking to somebody also who was out bed last week on Deborah Devonshire's plywood hen boxes, which sold for £10,000, and I was lying in bed going, how much can I justify for pieces of plywood? I totally get it. Totally fetishising those objects. Right, a couple of questions from Maggie, please. Okay, out. Sylvia's hand is, of course, up, Sylvia. I'll take one more. Go on.
My question is, you write the male character so convincingly and so well. How did you do it?
It's a question about literary transvestism. How do you write men?
Well, it's funny, I didn't find it at all. I think the idea, if I'd thought about it a lot before I started, I probably would have got a bit of vertigo about it. But actually, once I was writing it, it didn't really seem that different at all. I don't think it's any particular act of ventriloquism more than writing about, I don't know, a woman who was in an asylum in the 1930s. It didn't seem to me any more of a challenge than that. I mean, I do know some men, quite a few of them. It didn't seem like a really big deal to me, actually. I don't really understand why people find that baffling. I mean, so many writers have switched genders. It doesn't...
It's an interesting question. It does come up all the time, and I knew it would come up tonight, and I was thinking about it earlier, thinking, why are we it's such a binary question? Because the implication being somehow, not that I'm saying you think this, but that the world of men should be denied to you in your head, and vice versa to me. So, I wonder if there'll be a time when we stop asking that question.
Yeah. I don't know. It didn't seem difficult to me. I felt as I was saying to you, it did sort of start as a joke, so maybe that helped me get over any sort of nerves that I might have had.
The structure was quite televisual in lots of ways, and it made me think that maybe you were thinking about doing some writing for telly or film. Is that something? Really?
No,
you're like,
I think I'd be terrible at it. I did once actually start to write a script, and there's a bit where you have sort of dialogue in the script, and you have a little tiny, or you're supposed to have a very tiny bit of sort of scene setting. and I was discovering that my dialogue was there, and then I'd had this enormous kind of description of where they were and what they were doing, and I thought, actually, you know, this shows that I'm really meant to be a novelist, not a scriptwriter.
The novel, I have to say, is incredible. I'm sure, like me, that as you get towards the end of it, you'll be thinking, please don't. I can't tell you what she does, but it's incredibly clever, and it's very... You need to read the novel. Thank you. Maggie O'Farrell.
Thank you, Damien.